Welcome to DCF Investigations. Imagine a world where trust is implicit. A world where you walk into a pharmacy, grab a bottle of medicine to cure a minor ailment, and never once think to check the seal, because there is no seal. It is 1982. The internet does not exist. News travels through the morning paper and the evening broadcast. Families in the suburbs of Chicago leave their doors unlocked and trust their neighbors. It is a time of relative innocence in consumer culture, a time before safety measures we now take for granted became a mandatory part of our daily existence. But in the span of 3 terrifying days in late September, that innocence was shattered forever, replaced by a permanent paranoia that lingers to this very day. This is the story of the Chicago Tylenol Murders, a crime so random, so cruel, and so pivotal that it changed the way the entire world packages, sells, and consumes products. It remains one of the most frustrating and haunting cold cases in American history. To truly understand the horror of this event, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of Elk Grove Village, Illinois, on the morning of September 29th, 1982. It was a crisp autumn Wednesday. The leaves were just beginning to turn, signaling the coming Midwestern winter. In the Kellerman household, the day began with the groggy sounds of a child waking up unwell. Mary Kellerman was 12 years old, a bright and beloved 7th grader with a life full of promise ahead of her. She woke up complaining of a sore throat and a runny nose, symptoms that were annoying but certainly not life-threatening. Her parents, Dennis and Gianna, did what any loving parents would do. They sought to comfort her. They went to the medicine cabinet and retrieved a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol capsules. At the time, Tylenol was the king of painkillers. It commanded 37% of the market, a trusted brand found in nearly every medicine cabinet in America. It was the safe alternative to aspirin, marketed heavily as the gentle choice. Mary's parents gave her 1 capsule, a red and white pill that looked exactly like every other pill they had ever seen. Mary took the medicine, hoping for relief, and went into the bathroom. Moments later, her father heard a thud. He called out to her, but there was no answer. When he pushed the door open, he found his little girl collapsed on the floor, struggling to breathe. Paramedics were called immediately. They rushed Mary to Alexian Brothers Medical Center, working desperately to save her. But nothing worked. At 9:56 in the morning, Mary Kellerman was pronounced dead. The doctors were baffled. They suspected a stroke, perhaps a brain aneurysm, something catastrophic and sudden. No one suspected the pill. No one suspected murder. While the Kellermans were plunging into a nightmare of grief, across town in Arlington Heights, another tragedy was unfolding, one that would wipe out nearly an entire generation of a single family. Adam Janus, a 27-year-old postal worker, woke up with a minor chest pain. It was a nagging ache, nothing that kept him from his day, but enough to warrant a stop at the local Jewel Osco grocery store. He bought a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. He drove home, walked into his kitchen, took the medicine, and collapsed almost instantly. The paramedics arrived and rushed Adam to the hospital. Despite their best efforts, his heart stopped. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The doctors, seeing a young man die of massive cardiac arrest, assumed it was a natural, albeit tragic, biological failure. The Janus family was devastated. They gathered at Adam's home to mourn, to comfort one another, and to try to make sense of the sudden loss. Adam's brother, Stanley Janus, who was 25, and Stanley's wife, Teresa, only 19, were there. The grief was overwhelming. Stanley began to develop a headache, a throbbing tension brought on by the stress of his brother's death. Teresa, too, felt the weight of the day physically. In a twist of fate so cruel it sounds like fiction, Stanley and Teresa went into Adam's kitchen. They saw the open bottle of Tylenol on the counter. Assuming it was safe, assuming it would help them get through the worst day of their lives, they each took a capsule from the very same bottle that had just killed Adam. Within minutes, Stanley collapsed. Teresa followed. The family members remaining in the house watched in horror as two more of their loved ones fell to the floor, gasping for air, their bodies seizing. When the paramedics returned to the Janus home, the same house they had left only hours before, they were bewildered. They saw three people from the same family, in the same house, stricken by the same mysterious collapse on the same day. Police and firefighters initially suspected a gas leak. They evacuated the home, checking for carbon monoxide, checking for anything environmental. But the air was clean. Stanley died later that day. Teresa lingered on life support for 2 days before she too passed away. In 24 hours, the Janus family had been decimated. But the horror was not contained to Arlington Heights. In the nearby suburb of Winfield, Mary McFarland, a 31-year-old mother of 2, was at work at the Illinois Bell Phone Center. She told her co-workers she had a headache. She reached into her purse, took a Tylenol, and within minutes, slumped over at her desk. She was rushed to the hospital, where she died. In Sandwich, Illinois, Mary Rayner, 27 years old, had just given birth to her 4th child. She was at home, recovering, enjoying the first days with her newborn. She took a Tylenol for postpartum pain. She collapsed and died, leaving her husband a widower and her 4 children motherless. And then there was Paula Prince. Paula was 35, a flight attendant for United Airlines. We know exactly when she sealed her fate because of a haunting piece of surveillance footage, one of the few images we have of a victim interacting with the weapon. The grainy black and white video shows Paula at a Walgreens on North Wells Street in Chicago. It is late. She looks tired, wearing her coat, just wanting to go home after shift. She's seen purchasing a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. She pays for it, walks out of the frame, and heads home to her apartment. Her body would be found 2 days later. The bottle of Tylenol was open on her bathroom sink. 1 capsule was missing. By the evening of that first day, panic was beginning to bubble. But the connection had not yet been solidified. It took 2 sharp minds to put the pieces together. 2 firefighters, Philip Capitelli and Richard Keyworth, were discussing the strange events. They knew about the Janus family. They knew about Mary Kellerman. They realized both sets of victims had taken Tylenol. But the smoking gun came from a nurse named Helen Jensen. She was assisting the medical examiner and was at the hospital where the Janus family had been taken. She found the bottle of Tylenol in Adam Janus's belongings. She opened it and counted the pills. There were 6 missing. She leaned in and smelled the bottle. It smelled of rotten almonds. To a lay person, the smell might have been simply odd. But to anyone with training in chemistry or toxicology, the scent of bitter almonds is the hallmark of one thing: cyanide. Helen Jensen told the medical examiner, but he was skeptical. Tylenol? A trusted medicine? It seemed impossible. But Jensen was insistent. Samples of the victim's blood and the capsules were sent to the lab. The results were off the charts. The capsules didn't just contain a trace amount of cyanide, they were packed with it. Each tampered capsule contained thousands of times the lethal dose. The killer had emptied the acetaminophen powder, refilled the capsule with potassium cyanide, and put the two halves back together. The victim would swallow the pill, the gelatin would dissolve in the stomach, and the cyanide would be absorbed into the bloodstream almost instantly. It blocked the body's ability to use oxygen. At a cellular level, the victims were suffocating while breathing fresh air. It was a terrifying, painful, and rapid death. Once the connection was confirmed, the city of Chicago descended into a state of absolute terror. This was not a shooter targeting a specific enemy. This was not a crime of passion. This was domestic terrorism. The weapon was in the medicine cabinets of millions of people. The response was unprecedented. Police cars drove through the streets of Chicago neighborhoods, blaring warnings over bullhorns. Do not take Tylenol. If you have Tylenol, throw it away immediately. It was a scene out of a dystopian film. Officers went door to door. Television and radio stations broke into regular programming to issue alerts. This was pre-social media, so the word had to be spread by voice and broadcast. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in American history. A task force was formed involving the FBI, the Illinois State Police, and local departments from every affected suburb. They had over 100 investigators working around the clock. They were chasing a phantom. The killer had left no fingerprints on the bottles, no notes at the scenes, no witnesses. Johnson & Johnson, the parent company of Tylenol, faced a crisis that could have destroyed them. In a move that is still taught in business schools today as the gold standard of crisis management, they didn't try to hide. They didn't deny. They ordered an immediate recall of 31 million bottles of Tylenol with a retail value of over $100 million. They issued national warnings. They offered to exchange Tylenol capsules for solid tablets. They threw open their doors to the media and the investigators. The forensic analysis of the bottles revealed a chilling pattern. The poisoned bottles came from different production plants, meaning the tampering didn't happen at the factory. The killer had bought or stolen the bottles from various stores: Jewel, Osco, Walgreens, Dominic's. Taken them to a secondary location, spiked the capsules, and then returned to the stores to place them back on the shelves. This was a crime of extreme calculation. The killer had to stand in the aisle, looking like a normal shopper, and place a lethal booby trap on the shelf, waiting for a stranger to pick it up. The randomness was the point. The killer was playing God. As the weeks turned into months, the task force generated thousands of leads. But among the noise, 3 main suspects emerged, each more complex and disturbing than the last. The first and most prominent suspect was a man named James Lewis. A few days after the murders, Johnson & Johnson received a handwritten letter. The letter claimed responsibility for the killings and demanded $1 million to stop them. It was a classic extortion attempt. The letter included a bank account number. Investigators traced the account to a defunct travel agency owned by the wife of James Lewis. James Lewis was a con man with a dark past. He had previously been charged with the murder of an elderly man in Kansas City, a man found dismembered in a bag in Lewis's attic. Lewis had managed to get the charges dismissed on a technicality regarding the search warrant. He was intelligent, manipulative, and fugitive. A nationwide manhunt ensued. He was eventually spotted in New York City and captured at a public library. When interrogated, Lewis admitted to writing the extortion letter. He gave detailed accounts of how one could fill capsules with cyanide, demonstrating a knowledge of the mechanics of the crime. However, he steadfastly denied committing the actual murders. He claimed he just wanted to use the tragedy to make money. The investigators scrutinized his timeline. They found evidence placing him in New York at the time the bottles would have been placed on the shelves in Chicago. They couldn't physically place him in Illinois during the critical window. Lewis was convicted of extortion and served 12 years in prison, but he was never charged with the murders. To this day, some investigators believe he is the killer, theorizing he may have traveled back to Chicago unnoticed, while others believe he was just an opportunistic parasite feeding on the tragedy. The second suspect was a man named Roger Arnold. Arnold worked at a jewel warehouse in Melrose Park, a distribution center for one of the chains where poisoned bottles were found. He was described as a loner with a fascination for weapons and chemistry. Reports came in that Arnold had been acting strangely in a bar, talking about the killings in a way that made people uncomfortable. Police discovered that Arnold possessed a chemistry set and manuals on how to make poisons, including cyanide. The police brought him in. They held him for days. They turned his life upside down. But they could never find a direct link. They couldn't match the cyanide found in the pills to anything in his possession. The pressure of the investigation broke Arnold. He became paranoid. He believed a local bar owner, Marty Sinclair, had snitched on him to the police. In a tragic spin-off of the Tylenol case, Arnold went to a bar intending to kill Sinclair. Instead, he shot and killed a stranger named John Stanisha, whom he mistook for Sinclair. Arnold was convicted of second-degree murder for that crime and spent years in prison. He died in 2008. Was he the Tylenol killer? Or was he a disturbed man pushed over the edge by the pressure of being a suspect? The evidence remains inconclusive. Then there is the third, more famous name that has been whispered in connection to the case. Ted Kaczynski, known to the world as the Unabomber. This theory gained traction years later. In 1982, Kaczynski was active. His parents lived in Lombard, Illinois, a suburb right in the cluster of the poisoning sites. FBI profiles noted that Kaczynski was known to stay with his parents during that time. The Tylenol murders fit his modus operandi in some ways. Random targets, anti-corporate motives, a desire to cause chaos from a distance. Kaczynski was a genius mathematician with the capability to execute such a crime. Furthermore, the first Unabomber attacks involved wood and distinct mechanical parts, but the Tylenol murders were chemical. However, when the FBI asked Kaczynski for a DNA sample to compare to the Tylenol evidence, he refused. He denied involvement. While compelling due to his proximity and nature, there is no hard evidence linking him to the cyanide pills. As the years passed, the case went cold, but its legacy remained white-hot. The immediate aftermath of the murders saw a revolution in packaging. Before 1982, you could open a bottle of medicine, take a pill, and close it, and no one would know. After the murders, the Tylenol bill was passed by Congress, making it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. The Food and Drug Administration introduced new regulations requiring tamper-evident packaging. Foil seals, plastic shrink bands, pop-up safety buttons on jars. All of these exist directly because of the Chicago Tylenol Murders. Every time you struggle to peel the foil off a bottle of aspirin or cut the plastic off a tub of ice cream, you are interacting with the legacy of this crime. But what of the victims? What of the justice they were denied? In 2009, the FBI reopened the case. Technology had advanced light years since the early 80s. They hoped that modern forensic techniques could find touch DNA on the bottles or the capsules that had been preserved in evidence. They even executed search warrants on the home of James Lewis, seizing computers and documents. There was a renewed sense of hope that the killer, now an old man, might finally be caught. However, the DNA testing was inconclusive. The evidence had been handled by dozens of people in 1982, police, firefighters, pharmacists, long before DNA protocols were established. The samples were contaminated. The search of Lewis's home yielded no smoking gun. Today, the Chicago Tylenol murders remain unsolved. It is the perfect crime, in the most terrible sense of the word. 7 people lost their lives simply because they had a headache. A 12-year-old girl, a young mother, a postal worker, a flight attendant, randomly selected by a silent killer who vanished into the crowd. The theories continue to circulate. Some believe it was a disgruntled employee in the supply chain. Some believe it was a corporate rival trying to tank Johnson & Johnson stock. Some believe it was James Lewis all along, laughing from the shadows. Others believe the killer is dead, having taken the secret to the grave. The tragedy marked the end of an era of trust. It taught us that danger could lurk inside the most mundane objects in our homes. It taught us to check the seal. It taught us to be suspicious. As we look back at the events of 1982, we are left with a chilling reality. The person who walked into those grocery stores, who placed death on the shelves between the toothpaste and the vitamins, may still be out there. They may be your neighbor. They may be the elderly man sitting on a park bench. They watched the world panic, watched the laws change, and never said a word. Thank you for joining DCF Investigations for this deep dive into one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. We want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe James Lewis was the mastermind who got away with it? Or was there a silent predator whose name we have never heard? Leave your theories in the comments below. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and always check the seal.